Hello mate and welcome to the Ren'Py Masterclass Part 2. You might be wondering why I'm showing you the Photoshop screen right now, and there is a good reason for that. In this video, in this episode, we're going to be talking about screens, screen language, and how to customize the way that Ren'Py looks. The best way for me to explain how certain screen elements work is to use diagrams, which I'm going to draw as we go along. So the first thing I want to do is just explain some core concepts about screen language, and then we'll actually look at the code that's in our masterclass game files and talk about what they do, and then we'll have a look at customizing some of those things and how to do that and how to achieve what we want to achieve. Okay, so Ren'Py is actually a pretty simple system. People get a little bit intimidated when they start playing with Ren'Py, because they see Ren'Py code, they see Python, they see screen language, they see animation and transform language, they see user-defined displayables, which use a mix of Python and Pygame. So there's a lot of bits and pieces involved in creating a game in Ren'Py if you want to go beyond the basic text and image format. And in order for us to delve into those, let's draw some diagrams. So here we've got a facsimile of our screen, and as you can see, it's currently transparent, and that is because the screen layer by default is transparent until we put something in there to see. Otherwise we would end up with, well, a blank screen anyway. So if we want to put things on the screen, we have to create some elements, and the first thing is the screen itself. And every single visual element of your Ren'Py game is displayed on a screen. Now, a screen can consist of a number of elements, or it can just consist of a collection of other screens. For example, if I was to create a screen which contained all of the tooltip stuff, I could then reuse that screen without having to retype my code in another screen, so that I can use that tooltip element anywhere I want to. And that does open up a lot of things for us, a lot of functionality that we may be not familiar with right now, but we're going to look at. So the most basic element in Ren'Py is a frame. So I'm actually going to draw a kind of simulated frame on the screen. I'm just going to fill this box with the color black. Let's just grab my paint bucket tool, and there we go. So we have now filled our screen with black. Now, in reality, a frame is a box which can grow dependent on the size of the elements within it, unless you set a size for it. So in code, we can just say there is a frame, and then Ren'Py will actually put the frame in the top left-hand corner of our screen, and it will make it as big as it needs to be to contain the elements within it, which can be useful. However, it does make positioning elements in specific places within that frame a little bit tricky. Because obviously if I was to say the first element that I'm going to put into my screen, so I'm going to, let's do this, I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to grab my tool. Let's say I wanted to create another box within my, I'm just going to create a yellow box within that frame. Now if I tell Ren'Py, keep that box on the left hand side, the top left hand corner of the box, no problem whatsoever. It will align it to the top left hand corner of the box, plus however much padding we add to the frame, which is something we're going to get to in a bit. No problem whatsoever. However, if I want to put this box over here, but my frame is set to scale to whatever content is within it, what's actually going to happen is that this will remain where it is, and this frame, that's the wrong thing, let's just Control C that, there we go. This element will actually be scaling automatically to the size of the element within it, so all that will happen is our frame will be that big. And technically, this yellow box is actually justified to the right hand side of that box, but this box is scaled down to the size of the box that's contained within it, so it's just going to appear where it is. So what we have to do in that instance is say to Ren'Py, I want this box to be 2000 pixels wide, minimum. Or you can say absolute 100 or 200, 2000 pixels wide, and then when we justify this to the right hand side, the top right hand side, it will actually be in the top right hand side. Okay, now this is a really common mistake that people make, myself included. I'm always forgetting to sort these things out. So if you want something to be contained within something at a specific position on the screen, you have to make sure that you scale your frame and your boxes accordingly. Okay, so I can put frames inside frames. You can nest them as much as you want. It's not a problem, but what people will tend to do is have one frame which contains a number of elements. Now, the two main elements that you can get inside your frame are V-boxes and H-boxes. What's the difference between a V-box and an H-box? I hear you cry. I'm glad you asked. A V-box is a box which scales to the size of its content unless we specify its size, and it stacks everything that we put inside it vertically. So if I were to put 4 different lines of text in there, they would be scaled, positioned, from the top left, and then one line after the other scaled out, positioned vertically, okay? Which means if you wanted to present a certain amount of text that reads like a book, for example, you could put it in a vertical box and jobs are good. Now we also have H boxes, which I'm going to draw another one of, even though I think we don't really need to, but I'm going to draw one anyway. Let's say we have an H box, which I'm going to color red in this instance. Now, if you hadn't already guessed, an H box is a container, much like the V box, that instead of stacking everything vertically, it stacks everything horizontally. So if I was to put 4 lines of text in my H box, it would print them one after the other going left to right rather than top to bottom. You might be thinking to yourself, what's the point in that? Well, it is quite useful. For example, many of you who've seen some of my previous games will have seen that I have a bar in the top left hand, in the top of the screen, that kind of covers up the top fraction of the screen. And then I have the elements positioned from left to right throughout it. That's how you do it. You use an H box. You say, I want my H box to be 1920 pixels or 3840 pixels, or however many pixels across you have it. And then you can position your elements within it. And that is achieved by using alignment, which we are now going to talk about. So one of the many positions that we can give to every element on the screen, whether that is a text box or a V box or an H box or a frame or elements of text or images, is we can give them alignment code. So if I was to remove my 3 main elements from the screen and I just wanted, let's say I had another element, we'll go with a blue box in this case, and we're just going to draw it on the screen like so. If I wanted this element to be exactly in the center, I would say to RenPy, simply put this image or this box and then follow it with the code align, open brackets, 0.5, 0.5, i.e. I want it to be halfway down and halfway across. Okay, if I wanted it to be all the way across, but not at all off the bottom, so if I wanted it to be on the top right, it would be my align code would be 1.0 for all the way to the right, but 0.0 for no percentage of the distance down. So if you think about this as 0, 0, this as 1, 1, then the positions are around the screen based on that. You can also use the position command, which you can have either the X pos, Y pos, or the XY pos to actually position the box or the element in the screen at a precise number of pixels across and down. So the code for that is POS pos and then open brackets and then the number of pixels across followed by the number of pixels down, separated by a comma. Now I personally tend to prefer doing that because I want my elements in my screen to be precisely positioned. I don't like using the 0.1 to 0.5 kind of way of doing things. It's a little easier for me to think in terms of the number of pixels across and down. But, you know, it really is a matter of personal preference. Whichever of the two methods you use, that position will be transformed depending on the screen size. So currently, as you can see, I'm working on a 4K image resolution. So if I was to put this at, let's say 300 pixels across from the top left to 200 pixels down, then when I scale this image down, that gap will remain proportionate to the screen size. So I won't have to realign all of my screen elements based on a bigger screen or a smaller screen. Okay, it will be transformed, which is quite useful. Okay, so our alignment and our X and Y positions can be controlled quite easily. And the same thing can be said for the size of our elements as well. So we can just leave our screen elements, whether that be an H box, a V box, or a frame, without any size declaration at all, and they will automatically scale to the size of the elements contained within them. So for example, our V box will only be as wide as the text that we put inside it, or the image that we put inside it, and so on. Or we can actually declare the maximum, minimum, or absolute sizes that we want our boxes to be by using the command XY size, for we want to call it in pixels, or we can say X size, Y size, X maximum, and so on. Okay, so we can actually limit the sizes, and we'll see some of those commands in force when we look at the code very shortly. Okay, so just using those elements themselves can be quite useful. The next thing that we want to talk about is styles. Okay, so those of you that are familiar with web pages will know that there is a thing called CSS, which is basically a style sheet that declares what the properties of every element within our screen is going to be, i.e. how big they are, where they're going to be, what color they are, what font the text uses, and so on. And Ren'Py uses exactly the same kind of system, except it doesn't use CSS, it uses what we would actually call styles. So if we were to come into our code and we have a look at our screens file, you can see a whole bunch of styles declared here. And these are like the defaults. So you can say, let's have a look at one that might actually be useful. So we've got our label text here, for example, uses the property GUI text properties label. And if we actually go into our GUI file and look for text properties, which is here, you can see that there are a whole set of variables laid out, such as GUI text font, GUI name text font, GUI text size. So these variables are declared in the GUI file with all these defined statements listed down here. Now, there are two trains of thought when you come to customizing your screen, which I do feel like I need to discuss. You can either stick with using the GUI file and change these variables to change the properties that match your frames, your boxes, and so on within them. For example, if we were to go to button width and height, you can see there's a none. Button borders, something that we'll get into in a little while. But you can see all of these properties here. Choice button width, the button that comes up when we have a menu that comes up, they're currently set to 1185. The height is none, which means it will automatically scale to the text contained within it. The tile means that we're not going to tile the background. The borders, again, we're setting the borders to be 150 across, followed by 8 down, followed by 150 on the right hand side and 8 at the bottom, which means that they will scale to fit whatever element we have in them with this amount of white space, basically, between the edges and the content. Then we've got text fonts, text sizes. Text align, as you can see, is 0.5, which means it's going to appear in the middle of the button. And then the text colors we have here. So we've got almost white for our idle text color, completely white for our hovered color when the mouse is hovered over them, and then insensitive color is a sort of dark gray. Okay, and these properties are all contained within the GUI.rpy file. So if you are going to use these values to change the way that your screen looks, that's where you'll find them. The way I prefer to do it when I'm creating a new screen or I'm editing a screen, what you'll see when you go into the screens file is that a lot of the styles relevant to how things look are actually contained within the screens file, and they reference variables in the GUI file. For example, in our text box or our dialog box, you can see that it's referencing the GUI text box align and text box height variables from our GUI file. So if I pull up my GUI file again, we can look for text box height, text box align. So you can see it's 278 pixels high and it's aligned at the bottom of the screen, which is fine. But do I really need to define those variables in order to do that? Now that I know where the code for my say screen is, I really don't care about these variables. They don't do anything other than I could quite easily change my white align to 1.0 in here and my text box height to 278 there, and that will work just fine. all we're doing is we're removing the reference to the variable contained within our GUI.rpy file. So you can do it however you want. Personally, I prefer to do it the way I'm doing it now, and that's just editing the text or the style actually in the screens file, because chopping and changing backwards and forwards between files when you don't need to is a huge waste of time and energy. I understand why the RenPy team have done it the way they've done it, because for someone who has no clue what they're doing with RenPy, it can be a little easier just to see all of the variables in the GUI file. However, for me, I prefer just to do it this way. So let's look at our actual say screen variables. So style window. The window is the, as you can see here, ID window, style prefix say. Style prefix means that it's going to look for any style that contains the word say at the beginning, for example, say label and say dialog, and it will apply them to the elements of that type within here. So say label means that the dialog box will have the label in this style, and the dialog text will be contained, will be styled using this style. However, let's go back to the window properties. As you can see, the window is x-align 0.5. X-fill means true. What that's saying is that our dialog box is going to be located in the center of the screen and the X plane, but it is going to fill the X, basically the entire screen across the X axis. Okay, so it's going to be as wide as your screen is no matter what happens. It's going to be Y aligned at 1.0, which we now know means at the bottom of the screen, because 0 is the top, 1.0 is the bottom, and it's going to be 278 pixels tall from the top, or from the bottom, sorry, so it'll be 278 pixels, which means it's going to be round about this kind of height in our screen, okay? It's going to have a background image as well. Now, we've got a file called GUI textbox.png, whose x-align is going to be 0.5. In other words, it's going to be centered in our image across, and it's going to be positioned at 1.0, so it's going to be at the bottom of our box. Now, we can change that image for whatever we want. If you go into the GUI folder, you will find a PNG, which is convenient enough called textbox. You can edit that in Photoshop or Microsoft Paint if you want to. Alternatively, you can just upload or download another file and just change the name that's referenced in this command to whatever your text box image is. So you don't have to do a load of fandangly funky stuff to get the text box to change its appearance. All you have to do is edit the image, change these positions so that they correspond to the image that you've picked, and you're good as gold, basically. So yeah, that's simple. Alternatively, if you don't want to use a background image at all, let's say that you just want to use some kind of monochromatic background, we could actually delete this command and we could just input a color in there. So let's just go with hash 000000C for example, excuse me. That's going to be black, and it's going to be quite transparent because the last two digits, these two, so we've got 6RGB, and then the last two are the alpha value of our background color. My alpha value is just under half, which means it's going to be somewhere in the region of about 40%. That's going to be what our text box looks like. And as you can see, because we've edited that code, and we've still got the code that we left off from before, it's actually still asking for the player's name, which isn't going to change because we haven't edited it. But as you can see, our dialog box is now about 50% transparency, just less than 50% transparency, and it is a grey color, and it fills 278 pixels tall, fills the entire width of the screen. And we can change that if we want to. We can change that in real time. So let's go back to our code. Let's change the Y line to 0.0. Now, what do you think is going to happen? Let's have a look. We'll go back to our code and go Shift Reload. We can't do that at the moment because we have we're in text edit mode. Now I'll go to Shift Reload. We can see that now my text box becomes at the top of the screen, which is what it is. Personally, I would hate that. That would drive me insane, having the dialogue at the top of the screen. But if you're writing an RPG where that is more relevant, then, you know, by all means crack on and do it. Alternatively, we can change some of the other properties. Let's say we're going to change the Y line back we'll leave the Y line at 0, 0 actually. We're going to get rid of this line that says xfill true, and instead we're going to say x size, and we'll give it a value of, because I'm using a 4K screen, let's just say 1000. We don't need to put that in brackets, that was a typo. Y align is going to be 0, 0. X align, I'm now going to change to 0, 0 as well. And then I'm actually going to change this to Y fill true. Let's save that and let's see what happens to our dialog box now. As you can see, our dialog box is now 1000 pixels. I forgot this file is actually in 1080p, which is my fault for forgetting. As you can see, it's 1000 pixels wide. It fills up the entirety of the vertical value of the screen, and you can see that there. Okay, so you can play around with the shape and size of your dialog box all you want. I'm going to just change this back to the default just so that we don't get too confused. Y align and then Y size is 278. Y line is 1.0. Save that. And then as you can see, our dialog box is back to the bottom of the screen. Nice and easy, yeah? Now, there are two other elements within our say screen. There is the dialog text and the nameplate. And currently the nameplate is situated within the frame for the dialog box inside the quote-unquote window, as is our dialog. And we can see that there are two properties here. We've got the name box, which is the name box, is the bit that the name is contained within. And then the dialog is here as well. And these are basically referencing loads and loads of properties that are contained within the GUI file. Again, you can tell because it says GUI.nameXpos, nameXalign, and so on. And we can just change those values. Let's say I want my X position to be, I don't know, let's say 200 pixels instead. We can change that. We Control S, save it, come back to our script, and we can see that that's now moved to 200 pixels across. So we're no longer referencing that variable in the GUI file, but we haven't broken our code because we're feeding it values that it can actually use. Let's go with, you've created a new RenPy game, our dialog text. Let's see if we can adjust the properties of that. So we come down to our dialog text, X position, dialog, XPOS. Let's just change that to 200 as well. And now when I look back at my file, what you'll see is that should now line up with my nameplate. My nameplate actually has a padding in it, which means this is why that these aren't perfectly lined up. If I was to come back to my code and look for my name box, you can see padding there. If I were to change that to 0, 0, 0, 0, we remove the padding, basically set it to 0 on all four sides, and then we come back. You can now see that my text now lines up much more neatly with the dialog text there. Again, all I've done is stopped referencing the variable in the GUI file because that drives me up the wall, and we have basically changed the variable locally. Background again, so currently we have a namebox.png. We don't really need that. If you don't want your name box to have a background, if for example it's like this, it's embedded within our dialog box, does it really need a background of its own? If you were to situate it outside of the name, the dialog box, so slightly above it, then having a background would make sense. So let's do that. Okay, so our name box, our X size, Y pos, and so on. Currently in our say screen, the name box is located inside of our window. We could take this code out of there, like so. And now let's see what happens now that I've moved this window from inside this window. And there you go, you can see that it's actually now its position, its coordinates that it was being given are now relative to the whole screen and not just the window that it was contained within. So now we have to think, right, my window is 278 pixels tall, 278 out of 1080 is what, something like 700. So I know that that's not the exact amount, but I can't be bothered to do the math. So let's just change now my name box's Y position, and let's just change it to 700. Save. and we'll see where that ends up. Now that's a little bit closer, isn't it? But currently there's no background to that, which, you know, it doesn't kind of marry up with what we're doing. So let's pull up a calculator and we'll actually do 1080 minus 278 equals 802. Oh, well, yeah, I was 100 out. 802. So let's change our y-pos to 802. So we've changed our vertical position. Now we need to change our y-anchor. The anchor is the position that this coordinate will basically pin to it. So for example, if my y-anchor is the top left, 0, 0, then the top left corner of my dialog box will be 802. However, we don't necessarily want that. We want it to be from the bottom. So if I say 1.0 and then I save that, now 802 will be the bottom of my dialog, my nameplate. There you go, and you can see that. So now if we was to give my nameplate the same background as my nameplate, my dialog box, and now we come back to our file, you can see that it's exactly the same color. And because I've got two semi-transparent boxes close to each other, if I were to overlap them, then you'd see a line here where the two values of the colors were added together. But because I've positioned it perfectly in alignment with the top of the dialog box, there's no overlap, so we don't get a kind of line that stands out loads there. Now the problem we have in here is that my dialog is quite a distance from the top. Even if we were to have a sort of border around the inside of the frame, that's still quite a long way down. So now we can change the dialog position to be more close to the top. So dialog, y-pos, let's get rid of that. And let's just change it to 50 and see what happens. Okay, 50 pixels from the top of the box that it's contained within. And we have not done a... Did I forget to save that? No, 50 seems to be the value. Okay, let's change that then to 20 and see what happens. There we go. As you can see, it's getting closer to the top. So 50 was probably the value that it was without me realizing I had to put in the same value. So there we go. We can now see that we've created a new Ren'Py game, yada, yada, yada. And it's 20 pixels from the top plus whatever padding we've got set up. So if we were to look at the dialog box, there's a number of properties in there, and there's also adjust spacing, which means we can't adjust it. But so we can change the properties of here. If I wanted to, I could just get rid of this line altogether. In fact, what I'll do is I'll tag it out by pressing the hash key in front of it, and we'll see that not a lot's changed. So if I wanted to change the position to maybe tab that in ever so slightly, if I add 20 pixels to it, XPOS to let's say 225, and we come in again, and there you go. You can see it's now indented slightly, so it kind of looks a little bit more sensible. Cool beans, yeah. Nice and easy. So that is how we can modify the way that our dialog box looks. And all we've done here is we've changed the properties using the styles. Now you don't have to necessarily do it that way. For example, because we're referencing the say dialog style down here, because we've used the style prefix say, and then it's referencing these things, it will by default come down to here. However, if I were to put a command after this, for example, XPOS 500, that will overwrite the style, and now you can see that my text is appearing 500 pixels across, which is, you know, useful if you want every element in the screen to follow the same property, but you want to change one or two things. You can just add those commands, those style properties, to the actual line where the text or the image or the element within the screen is being displayed, and it will apply that command directly to that line and only that line, which is useful, I think you'll find. So let's have a look at how we can modify the choice screen. So if you remember from our previous episode, we had this text and then we came up with this. This is our choice screen that's come up here. As you can see, we've got the say screen, which doesn't show a name there. We could have Eileen say it if we wanted to, but meh, it doesn't matter. And as you can see, that the text in our dialog screen is still following the style code that we applied to previously. So let's just get rid of that XPOS 500 there, just because it looks kind of weird. We'll save it. We're still in auto reload. So I'll reload our choice screen, and now the text will align where it wants to be. But I don't really like the way that these buttons look. I don't like where they are. So let's change those values instead. So if we scroll down a little further, there's the input. That's where we input text. And then here is choice. What we have here is a for loop. And I'll explain for loops in a later episode. All you need to know is that we've created a VBox. And if you remember from the start of this episode, a VBox is a container which has all of its children listed or positioned vertically one above the other in the order that you put them in the box. So if I was to put numbers 1, 2, and 3 in the box, it would put 1, 2, 3, listing them vertically that way, okay? And then what we're doing is we're running through all of the items within our menu. So when we call the choice screen, or rather when RenPy calls the choice screen, it'll send a list of all of the menu items that we have declared. In this case, we've got start again with a output of jump start, and finish with call finish. Yeah, so those are our two elements in this case. They are pushed into the screen as a list. Again, don't worry about what lists are right now. We'll talk about them in a bit. So there's a list of things that we want to display on the screen. And for each one, it's going to create a text button. The text is going to be the caption, and the action is going to be whatever the following action is. In the case of these kind of menus, it's just a case of when you click on the button, it will then do the code that follows, essentially, okay? And again, we've got a number of choices, choice screen styles here, which we can adjust. For example, the style choice VBox, we've got style prefix choice, so anything that begins with choice that is contained within the choice screen will have its own style applied to it if we declare it. So the choice of VBox is position, and the alignment and the anchor are set here in here, and we can change that. So let's do that. First thing we're going to do is we'll change the X align. I would rather have it in the right hand portion of the screen, but rather than doing it using X align, I'm going to give it an XPOS. Okay, and I'm going to give it an XPOS of about, let's say, 1900. I'm going to change the X anchor and the Y anchor. So let's just get rid of Y anchor, and we're just going to replace it with the command anchor, because we're declaring both at the same time, so we don't need to say X or Y. So I want my X anchor to be 1.0 and my Y anchor to be 1.0 as well. So I want my VBox to be positioned in the bottom left hand corner of the screen. Simple as, yeah? Nice and easy. Now my YPOS we will have to change. So I'm going to change that to 1080 because I want it to be positioned, let's say actually 1060. I want it to be 20 pixels from the bottom of the screen, 20 pixels from the right hand side of the screen. Now if I just save that, we'll come over into our game file and we'll see what happens. As you can see, our buttons are now in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, 20 pixels from the bottom, 20 pixels from the left. Now let's look at our choice buttons, because these are massive and completely unnecessarily so. So let's have a look at those. Choice button is default. Let's just get rid of that. And we'll put in our own values in here. So first thing I'm going to do is going to say X size, but I'm actually going to say X maximum because I don't want them to be any bigger than a certain size. And let's just say 300 is going to be my X maximum. Okay. I'm going to change the background and I'm going to set it to match the dialog box. In fact, because the buttons are appearing above the dialog box as it currently stands, I'm actually going to say background none. I don't want a background over these buttons because I don't want that weird two semi-transparent layers overlapping effect. As you can see now, my buttons no longer have a backdrop. They are positioned in the bottom left-hand corner again. And now I have to decide, do I actually like it this way or would the backdrop be better? And is the spacing okay? I don't really like the spacing, so let's fix that first. So we have to actually change the spacing in our VBox. As you can see, spacing, it's referenced in the GUI file. This is just how many pixels we're going to put between the elements vertically within our VBox. I've changed it to 5. As you can see, they're now closer together, looks better, yeah? So now I'm going to change the alignment of my choice button text because at the moment it's positioned in the left-hand side and we need to change that. So let's just change the alignment. In fact, I'll do it here as well. I'm going to say align 0.5 and we'll change that to X align because we're only wanting it to affect the X. And now if we look at what we've got, they're aligned to the middle, but there is a problem. They will align to the middle non-uniformly, by which I mean currently my two options are start again and finish, and they're aligned to the center of the widest element in the VBox, which means that they're aligned to, let's say that's 100 pixels from the right hand side of the screen, okay? If I were to come into my script and change start again bloody hell, for example, and now I save it, and now I come back and look at my screen, because I've got my X maximum set to a certain size, the text within the button's going to wrap, which is fine. So they're aligned to the center of that again, yeah? So they're aligned to the center of that 300 pixels or however big I set it there with the text wrap. Now the text wrap itself might be problematic. It depends on how you want to set up your menu. But the problem is when you have something that's much smaller, so let's just go start and we'll just leave that with finish. Now if I save that, and then we look at it. Now it's aligned to the center of the widest element, which is finish. So the position that they're aligned to has now shifted to the right slightly. Now that maybe doesn't bother you, but it would bother the hell out of me, especially after a long period of time playing the game, because center align is not a particularly great method of creating these kind of things. So it's problematic, let's put it that way. It can be quite jarring. So let's change some properties to get that looking a little better. So if we have a look at our screens.rpy file again, currently my choice button is set to a maximum of 300 pixels wide, but there's no minimum. I could set an X minimum value as well, or I can just say X size. Now my buttons will always be 300 pixels wide, no matter what they contain, and these will always align center for those 300 pixels. Again, don't particularly like center align, so I'm going to change that value as well. I'm going to change my align to 0.0, and when I come back in and save it and look at it again, now my text is going to be aligned to the left, and it's still not aligned perfectly. So we're going to have a look at some other properties here. Let's just change this to here. If we delete this and let's just change this to X align 0.0 and we save that, we can have a look in our window. The text may change its appearance slightly or it may not, but now you can see it's properly aligned, yeah, and the values are, the text is a little bit more uniform. But if you want the text properties to change the font and all that sort of thing, again, we can put in different font values, we can put in different sizes. Let's change the size from whatever it currently is, which is let's have a look. Text size is 33 at the moment, so let's just change that down to 22. We'll save it, we'll have a look at the screen, and then we can see the text is now much smaller, which is not the end of the world, and we can still click on it and it says, what is your name? Just say Barry. You've created a new Ren'Py game, Barry. Once you add pictures, blah blah blah, and then you can see our choice menu is still there. Now this is obviously me just teaching you how to set up these different variables and get things looking right. If you're going to do it this way, I would probably recommend having some kind of background color to your buttons so that they actually stand out, because if you've never played a visual novel before in your life and you're seeing what do you want to do, your eye is not automatically going to go down there. It's going to be looking around the screen, you're going to be looking at Eileen Happy, you're going to be looking at BG Room, you're going to be thinking, right, okay, so what am I supposed to do now? Because we've moved the menu from the center of the screen, which is the eye-grabbing part of the screen, that wasn't a problem. We've moved it from there now, so the eye isn't automatically coming to the position where the buttons are. So we need to put in a background color on our choice buttons, and we're going to come back up to our say screen. We're just going to grab this bit of text here where we've said the background color, and we're going to go into our choice buttons and we're going to input that code into there so that it has a background color. Save our code, come back in, and we have style property appears twice. That's my fault. We'll come out of there, get rid of that. Come on. going to have a bit of a hissy fit before it quits. It's not a problem. We've said background none. See, that's why there's an error. So if we can't declare the same property twice, there you go. That's just going to have a bit of a think. We'll come back into our master class code and we'll have a look at that screen again now that I'm not making mistakes. What's your name? Bleh. Okay, so now you can see that there is a faint background to our buttons, so they kind of stand out a little bit better. You could also have let's just set up our choice button. Okay, so we've got a text button here at the moment, yeah, which has the caption and the eye caption. Now, a text button is quite literally what it says on the tin. It is text that acts like a button. There are different elements that we can use, for example, buttons and image buttons. An image button, funnily enough, does exactly what it says on the tin. It puts an image on the screen that acts like a button. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a button that has text in it still by just changing that to button, text, iText, action, iAction. So it still does the same thing, but now I can add stuff within my button that will enable me to add more things to it. So for example, I could put an HBox inside my button and I can have some text before my text. Let's just say I want to put that in there as a prefix to the text that's going to appear in my text button. If we come in, we're going to have to do a reload there so that it reloads the script. And now you can see that we've got nice big arrow pointing to the options. And that's another thing that you can do. And all we've done is we've changed our text button to an ordinary button and then put a horizontal box within it, which adds before our text the right arrow. We could change that for a star if we wanted to. We can change it for whatever the hell we want to. We can put an image in there if we want to, like an ordinary bullet point. Entirely up to you what you want to do there. So that's a nifty little trick for us to be able to put more content within our choice buttons that do not require any faffery. However, what I will say is that the button text is now going to need to be restyled, as in we need to apply styles to the text because we're no longer addressing that kind of text using our style. I appreciate that probably sounded like gobbledygook to you, so I will show you something else. Let's say we still want that text to follow that style. I'm going to copy this, and after here I'm going to say style like that. Okay, so what I'm saying with this command is this style that I've declared down here, I still want this text and this text now to follow those rules. So if we come back into our file now, you can see that they now actually follow the styling changes that we made to that. Okay, so this is a way around our choice, our style prefix. If we want our styled text to follow a different style than the default, we can actually declare another style and then say I want this line of text to follow that style and this line of text to follow that style as well. And we can also do, for example, within the text button, remember that the text button itself is a little mini frame, if you like, and then the text that's contained within it will be able to be moved within the frame or within the button, just like you can with elements within a frame. So if I change the white line to 0.5 on my choice button text, and now I come back to my code, you can see that the positioning of my text hasn't necessarily changed, but I might be able to change the position of my asterisk or whatever else I put in there. So we can move things around like that, okay? Just think about your screen layouts as containers, and you position each thing within that container relative to the container, not relative to the entire screen. So that's how that all works. So again, like in a previous episode, what I would encourage you all to do is have a play with the things that we've talked about here. Go in and have a look at the code in the default files that are created, and you can see what's happening where it's referencing the variables from the other screens. All of those can be changed either locally or by going into the GUI file and changing them yourself. Within the screens file, there are basically the screens for every single thing that you possibly need. So for example, the navigation screen here that we can see on the screen now, that is the menu that appears in both the main menu and the game menu. So main menu and the game menu. This is the game menu. As you can see, history, save, load, preferences, main menu, about, help, quit. If I go into main menu, yeah, whatever, you can see mostly the same properties are available. And we're saying if it's the main menu, start. If it's not the main menu, i.e. that's what the else command means. If it's not the main menu, then show the history and the save button. So there's no point having a save command within the main menu because there's nothing to save. You're not in the game. However, when we're in the main menu, we do want load. We do want preferences if you have preferences options to change. If in replay, you can have the option to end replay. If not main menu, then we have a button that says go to the main menu. Then we have the text button that shows about. And then we've got different variants. Again, you can leave them in or you can delete them as you want to. So for example, I don't really care about the history, so I'm going to delete that from there. I don't really care about preferences. There's not going to be a replay option. If not main menu, then it shows main menu. I don't really want an about section. And my game's only going to be a PC variant. So I'm going to get rid of that command and I'm going to untab that one there like that. Now if I go to save, hopefully I haven't completely ruined it. There we go. I got rid of elif not main menu. We don't need to change that. We just changed elif to if not main menu. Save it again. Lo and behold, it'll start working again. There you go. So now from my main menu, all I've got is start, load and quit. If I go into the game and then right click to bring up the game menu, I now have save, load, main menu and quit. Nice and easy, yeah? So again, go through these files. If you want to play around with them, just copy the file, save it as a different name, go in, play around with whatever you want, and then if you completely knacker it, you can just put the original text back into the file and everything will spring back to life and work again. Okay? There's nothing that you can do within code in Ren'Py that you can't undo by undoing your changes. And if we're at this stage of the game where we're just playing around with the existing files and testing to see how things work, we haven't actually done any real coding yet. We've changed some properties and we've put an input for the player name and so on, but realistically, if you completely balls it up and you've not backed up the file, just create another game. The same files will be there, the same text will be there, everything will be the same. It's just the name of the game that will need to be adjusted. That's all it is, okay? So go into these screen files, have a look, play around with the properties, try moving things around, try changing the background images or applying background colors, have a go at all of that stuff. You'll be amazed what you can accomplish just by playing with these two files. The GUI file, if you're going to keep referencing the variables within it, screens file on its own if you're not. Nice and easy, okay? So that pretty much brings us to near enough, well, 50 minutes thereabouts. I hope you found that useful, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. More coming soon. Thanks very much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye-bye.